What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer. With more than 20 million players within its first 2 weeks, Marvel Rivals right out of the gate is nothing short of a smashing success, with many of those said players being former Overwatch players. It seems many have been looking for an opportunity to jump ship from Overwatch and pick up a new and exciting game in the hero shooter genre, and Marvel Rivals has been just that, with player numbers between the two, even almost a month after launch, looking pretty stark. And yet, as a longtime Overwatch player myself who's already sunk over a dozen hours into Marvel Rivals, wait a minute, a dozen? That's it? Only 12? Holy moly, I've been playing this game on and off for like a month at this point, and I've only accumulated 12 hours? Let me just see how many hours I've put into Overwatch during this time frame. How about Fortnite?
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, that honestly checks out. The point I'm trying to get at here is that yes, Marvel Rivals is a smashing hit, and yes, it's been an incredibly popular addition to the hero shooter genre, but as an Overwatch player myself, who also plays evidently quite a bit of Fortnite, I gotta admit, Marvel Rivals hasn't converted me. Not in the least. Which is why I wanted to do a video today talking about why exactly Marvel Rivals has failed to convert me from an 8-year-old game into a fresh, new, and exciting experience. How is it that when so many people are jumping ship to this new title, for me personally, I just haven't been able to make the switch? And to start things off, let's have a little context on who exactly I am. For those of you who are perhaps new to the channel, hello, welcome, good to see you first and foremost. But beyond that, I have been an Overwatch player and content creator for basically the entirety of Overwatch's lifespan. I first started playing the game back in the open beta in May of 2016, with me starting to produce videos focused on Overwatch in early 2017, and ever since then, Overwatch has been the thing I cover on my YouTube channel. I play the game close to every day, put out multiple streams and videos a week, so pretty clearly you can say that I am a pretty die-hard Overwatch fan. For some additional context, I consider myself a pro-casual, which is to say the vast majority of my playtime is in quick play. I am not someone who cares excessively about competitive or ranking up. I just play Overwatch because at the end of the day, Overwatch is a really fun game to play. Even 8 years on, I still love playing Overwatch, which is why I was rather intrigued by Marvel Rivals coming along, and especially the major hype surrounding it, because I was interested to see how it would compare. As someone who's enjoyed so many years out of Overwatch, I was intrigued by the idea of a new game coming to the market that fit that same sort of playstyle. Yes, there are some differences, mainly things like the third-person perspective versus first-person, but seeing as how I'm also a massive Fortnite player, I didn't think for a moment that third-person would be any sort of turn-off for me in terms of being able to enjoy a game like Marvel Rivals. And so, when the time came and Rivals at long last finally released, I hopped into the game, played it live on stream, and wasn't particularly sold on it. And I think it's time now for us to get into why exactly, after about a month of going on and off playing Marvel Rivals, reflecting on the actual experience I've had playing it versus Overwatch or Fortnite or any other shooter I've played over the years, to really figure out why Marvel Rivals isn't doing it for me. And the first, and in a lot of ways, I think biggest issue I have with Marvel Rivals is the gameplay. Now, I think this can be broken down into a number of different aspects, but the biggest one that really sticks out to me, and I noticed immediately upon first playing Marvel Rivals, the physics and movement and overall game engine of Marvel Rivals kinda sucks. Like, it's not terrible by any means, and it's still fun to play on a base level, but overall, just the physics and movement of running around as a given character just doesn't feel that good. A lot of characters seem to move almost annoyingly slow, like you're trotting through molasses just trying to walk from one point to the next, with many characters, especially those with some sort of vertical mobility type mechanics, feeling really sort of floaty in the way they just sort of move around. There's no weight to anything you do in terms of movement at the very least, let alone shooting and damaging and receiving some sort of feedback from actually interacting in the game itself, which I'll get onto more in just a minute. But simply put, Marvel Rivals on a pure just physics of movement within a game doesn't feel very good. And this is an interesting one because I haven't seen many people really bring this up as a point, despite the fact that to me, it was evident immediately. Compare it to Overwatch, a game where everything feels really tight in terms of how the mechanics and movement and just physics of everything feels and works. When you jump, it feels like you're jumping. When you run, it feels like you're running. The feedback for each and every movement and action is so visceral and tangible that it just makes the sensation of merely playing the game feel good, even if you aren't winning, even if you aren't necessarily engaging in combat. The sound of firing a weapon, jumping, your own footsteps and abilities. Everything is so tightly designed to make even the most basic of mechanics within the game itself feel satisfying. And this is something which Marvel Rivals, by comparison, doesn't have on an even remotely comparable level. And I think a lot of people would probably try to refute this argument by saying a lot of it has to do with the third-person perspective of Rivals versus the first-person of Overwatch, saying that, oh, well, of course it doesn't feel as tight because your camera's behind the character as opposed to in the eyes of said character. But I really don't think that's the case because, as I mentioned before, Fortnite achieves the third-person perspective perfectly while having what I would say is an entirely comparable feel to Overwatch in terms of the weight and impact and feel of all those different aspects. Both Overwatch and Fortnite feel extremely satisfying to play. Even if you're just running around spawn, doing nothing, smashing arcade machines, or climbing up a little wall, everything feels good. In Marvel Rivals, I certainly wouldn't go so far as to say it feels bad, but it is not on par with Overwatch or Fortnite. And dare I even say it, it almost kind of feels like a mobile game in this regard. Yeah, I know that is a pretty scathing criticism to throw at it, but honestly, at least compared to those others, that's how it feels. But getting back to the note of the speed of characters in Marvel Rivals, this is another interesting one because I think the game itself is supposed to have a bit of a slower gameplay pacing than Overwatch, which is fine. I can understand people being interested in having a game that's not as quick and actiony as Overwatch is. But I think, honestly, in terms of the actual movement of characters, disregarding the mechanical aspects I just touched on, a lot of characters just feel so annoyingly slow. Perhaps my two favorite characters I've found in Marvel Rivals so far are Penny and Mantis, and I think a major component for why I enjoy these characters, especially in the case of Mantis, is that they're faster than the average character. Now, at least in certain ways. Penny gets a speed boost when she's within her web areas, and Mantis gets a speed boost when she's at full health, which, if you're playing her right, is most of the time. And this added speed boost just makes them feel better. Other characters, by comparison, feel so sluggish, like there's a delay in reaction whenever you're trying to move from one position to the next, or intervene in a combat scenario, or evade a combat scenario even. The slow pace at which the average character moves just feels frustrating in a lot of ways. And sure, many characters do have their own mobility mechanics to aid in this. Venom and Spider-Man can simply swing away, Rocket has his little boosters he can use to jet in a given direction. But even so, just having to rely on specific activated abilities in order for a character's mere movement to feel satisfying results in that character overall just not feeling great. Not to mention the fact that, much like the overall game engine physics of Rivals itself, many of these movement abilities I think are really frustratingly bad. Venom's swing, even when you do have the manual targeting enabled, just feels sort of weird and you always end up in places that you don't really want or intend to. I've played around with him quite a bit as a hero and have just honestly at best found his swinging mechanic to be a terribly lacking imitation of Wrecking Balls. As someone who plays a ton of Wrecking Ball in Overwatch, I had so many people telling me I would love Venom because he's basically Marvel Rivals Wrecking Ball, and on paper, yeah, sure, he is, but trying to say that Venom is in any way as satisfying to play as Wrecking Ball when it comes to the mobility and the strategy and the text that he's capable of as a character simply just isn't true. Venom's swinging mechanic is only useful for full engages or disengages. You can't use it to cleverly navigate around a specific portion of the map. You can't use it to get a little speed boost when staying within a small area. It's only full engage, disengage. There's no other utilization of this mechanic, which makes it infinitely less satisfying, useful, and engaging of a mechanic for for the character to have. Yes, he is still fun to play, and I do enjoy implementing many of my Wrecking Ball playstyles with Venom to whatever extent I'm capable of, but it's the feeling of these sorts of mechanics that just aren't on par. Rocket, as I mentioned, is another character who I've really wanted to get into playing because Rocket is one of the few Marvel characters who I do actually quite like as a character, but I think he's actually one of the worst offenders in terms of how his abilities feel, with his booster ability being probably one of the worst feeling abilities in the entire game. I mean, first of all, the fact he can only boost in whatever direction he's facing is really annoying. Could they really not just give him an omnidirectional boost similar to Tracer's Blink? I get that it has the vertical component, so it might be kind of hard to really incorporate that, but surely they could have designed it such that you always fire in the direction your camera's facing by default, and then only go in a different direction, such as sideways or backwards, if you're inputting a directional input when you activate the ability. Because there are so many times where you're engaging in combat and someone gets a little too close up in your face and you want to quickly disengage, but rather than being able to just boost backwards the same way Tracer would be able to just blink backwards, you have to physically turn yourself a 180 degrees and then boost, which not only takes time to turn your camera then, but also you take your eyes off the person who's actively trying to kill you, which is often a pretty bad idea, especially in an intense situation where you're a fraction of a second away from dying. And that's to say nothing of the actual audio design and feedback of using this boost ability. Let me just go ahead and show you the visuals and audio for a few comparable Overwatch hero abilities, and then compare it to Rocket's boost. This is night and day. Juno, Tracer, Lifeweaver all have these very satisfying boosts and dashes, which can be used in any direction, first and foremost. The design and implementation of the little details of these abilities in Overwatch are so satisfying, whereas Rocket's boost has the feedback of a dry fart. And unfortunately, this extends to the rest of his kit as well. Despite the damage output of his primary fire, it sounds and feels like it's firing Nerf darts. And his healing orbs have all the feedback of a half-deflated balloon. Everything about this character just feels so loose and floaty and terrible, which maybe to some extent was intentional, because yes, he's a tiny raccoon, he's very lightweight, you'd expect him to kind of float around in a sense, but surely there's a way for them to achieve this same sort of thematic character design without having the player feel like they're playing a well-armed tumbleweed. It's so pathetic and unsatisfying. Though I suppose I will at least commend Marvel Rivals on the wall climbing mechanic that not only Rocket has, but also Penny and Venom and Spider-Man have as well to a greater extent, in that they're able to sort of hang on the wall and horizontally move around. That mechanic actually feels pretty well implemented and is something that doesn't exist in Overwatch, at least not the clinging to the wall portion of it. So credit where credit's due. I think they did a good job with the climbing mechanic, and I imagine if you're a big Spider-Man fan, that's an important mechanic to have feel good, so good on them for that. But outside of this one example, yeah, I can't say that much of the mobility and movement abilities in Rivals really feel that good. But now that I've sort of touched on kits a little bit here, I think I'll move on from the just mechanics and physics of Marvel Rivals to more deliberate gameplay kit designs for the various characters. The character designs in Marvel Rivals, I feel, are a little bit all over the place. There's some which I think are actually really tightly designed and work really well. Of the characters I've played a significant amount of, Squirrel Girl is perhaps the best example of a character who has an overall really simplistic but really coherent, tightly designed and effective kit. She has a jump, enabling you to get to a higher elevation, which is beneficial given that her acorns have gravity to them and drop down, so much like Junkrat, it's advantageous to often hold a high position. And then she has a rooting ability with her special acorn that not only is effective at CCing the enemy, but perfectly combos combos with her own primary fire, and that it makes it easier to land those high damage acorn shots. And then she has another ability that basically just lets her do either one of those two first abilities again. Okay, simple enough. Then her ultimate is basically just a high damage wave that goes out and runs around the map, and that's it. That's her entire kit. And it's so simple and so tightly designed that it's great. It works perfectly. She's one of my favorite heroes because of that. But then at the same time, you get characters like Penny, who have such an excessively bloated kit with so many different little mechanics in play that I can't help but feel like these two characters were fundamentally designed by entirely different people. She has her primary fire, she has her grapple ability, she has her stun ability, she has her little spider nest, and then some of those other abilities, also put down spider webbing, which can sort of combine with the nest's web to make a sort of spider web territory that gives her additional bonuses such as self-healing and faster movement. But then on top of that, she also has a mine she can deploy. In fact, she can deploy several of these, and while they're within the web's vicinity, they're invisible and behave like you would expect any normal mine to behave. Somebody walks over it and it explodes. But then there's also the spider drones, which are only produced by her nest hub thing, and during her ultimate, which are like mines, except that they will actually go out of their way to hunt down targets that come close enough, making them effectively just mines, but with slightly more range in essence. Yeah, needless to say, characters like Penny, while they're fun to play once you get the hang of them, do feel unnecessarily bloated in their design. Why did there need to be so many different aspects as a part of this character's kit? Why does she need to be able to do as much as she does? Does she really need to be able to stun enemies with her web? It kind of feels like an unnecessary part of her kit that doesn't necessarily tie in with anything else she does. Why does she need to be able to have two separate types of mines effectively between the spider mines and the spider drones? Honestly, I feel like half the roster in Rivals could have gone through just purely a simplification pass, where they just take their kit, look at it, and think, how do we achieve that exact same playstyle that we want for that character to have, but without so many mechanics and abilities being incorporated into it? Especially given the game's 6v6 format, it feels like even more so than Overwatch with its 5v5, characters don't need to be able to do as many things individually. And that's not even getting to what is perhaps my least favorite thing in all of Marvel Rivals, which is team-up abilities. Now, I get it. I get how exciting it is to see your favorite characters be able to team up in the game itself and do combos. I know it's exciting to see Hulk throw Wolverine. I know it's exciting to see Jeff or Rocket ride around on Groot. But in terms of an actual mechanic in the game itself, these are not good game mechanics. In essence, team-up abilities are just hard-coded synergies that force given characters to work well together regardless of what their base kits intrinsically possess. Whether it's a character getting extra damage or extra health or a self-revive or some other new ability, giving characters flat-out hard-coded statistical buffs simply because they're being played on the same team as another character is a really uninteresting way to make characters synergize with each other. Compared to Overwatch, where you have famous synergies like Rein Zarya or Zarya Hanzo with their ultimates. Hero combinations that intrinsically work very well together, not because the devs specifically designed these heroes to complement each other with special abilities and mechanics and buffs that only exist when both are being played, but because of the natural dynamics of their inherent kits. It's way more interesting for the community to find characters that work well together in the game itself for different combos and team-ups than for the devs to just say, hey, these two, they work well together, that's how you're supposed to play the game. The devs are taking the fun and creativity of being able to find these sorts of character team-ups away from the player base and just doing it themselves based purely on the significance of some external reference, like Hulk throwing Wolverine, which I get it. If you're a big Marvel fan, I'm sure it is very exciting to get to do that in a video game when you're playing with your friends, but on a pure base gameplay front, it's not great and inherently just restricts the freedom of playstyle of the game itself. Not to mention the fact that so many of these team-up abilities add extra mechanics to characters whose kits are already excessively bloated. Again, going back to Penny, if she's on a team with Venom, she gets her little self-AoE spiky Venom ability, which is just another ability on top of her kit, which doesn't even necessarily synergize that well with the rest of her kit. It's just a thing she can do because Venom. Yeah, overall, I'm not a fan of team-up abilities. I think at best, they're just gimmicky mechanics that add additional bloat to the game, and worse, they end up pigeonholing certain characters into specific team compositions that end up feeling heavily forced by the hand of the devs, rather than just the characters naturally working well together. Overall, not a fan of these at all. But on that note, let's move on to the next thing I've got here. Too few maps. Simply put, too few maps. Marvel Rivals launched with 8 maps in the game, and from my understanding, there will be more maps added as time goes on, but after having played the game for only a dozen hours, as I showed off previously, it really feels like 8 maps is too few. You get the same maps over and over and over again, and I personally am tired of seeing these same maps over and over again. While I do commend them on having plenty of different heroes to play as in the game, I really think they should have focused on adding at least a few more maps with the launch of the game itself. Because let's be honest, most players tend to boil down to playing only a handful of actual heroes regardless of how many are in the game. Let's be generous and say a given player spends probably 90% of their time playing like 6 characters. That number of characters played won't really change as more heroes get added. The characters they do play might change as new characters get introduced, and they'll probably enjoy playing those new characters for at least a little bit, but at the end of the day, most people only have a small set of characters that they really spend the majority of their time playing, which is why I think having map variety in a game like Marvel Rivals or Overwatch is so important as well. While a map specifically may not be as exciting as a new hero, it enables you to play those heroes you're already familiar with and already enjoy and love in more scenarios. And when there's only 8 maps, there aren't that many scenarios to play them in, and the game ends up feeling very repetitive, even when I've only put about a dozen hours into the game so far. Overwatch, by comparison, when it first launched back in 2016, had 12 different maps to play on across 4 different game modes. Marvel Rivals has 8 maps spread across 3 modes. Honestly, I don't think there's much more to say on this front. It just seems like they should have had more maps when the game launched, and I'm sure they will add more maps as time goes on, along with more game modes. And I do appreciate that they at least have seasonal modes being a thing, what with like Jeff's Winter Wonderland type mode where he's basically playing Splatoon. But for the core game itself, more maps. Game needs more maps, no question there. And that then takes us to the final point I'd like to make in this rambly video, which is that at the end of the day, I'm not particularly sold on Marvel Rivals because I'm not really a Marvel fan. This was a point which I wasn't sure whether or not I really wanted to include in the video because it is an entirely subjective perspective on it. But I do think it's an important enough point to make that it was worth bringing up. So yeah, I'm not a Marvel fan. I never have been. There's a few characters here and there who I enjoy, like as I mentioned, Rocket I think is a fun character. Captain America is a cool character, probably my favorite Marvel hero, but even then it's like I'm not really that big of a fan of Captain America. I just think he's kind of cool. So going into Marvel Rivals, the Marvel IP itself does nothing for me. In fact, if anything, it may even hurt my ability to get into the game because A, the MCU has become so tiresome and terrible at this point that I have a negative association with anything Marvel related, and B, it feels like this is a game made deliberately for people who aren't me, if that makes sense. I can appreciate the fact that this game has references to super obscure characters that diehard fans love getting to see represented. I can appreciate all the little attention to detail in the character voice lines and art styles and aesthetics and little elements that for people who are huge Marvel fans, of which there are a ton, those sorts of things are super duper exciting. And I can appreciate that for people who are part of that club. But for me, I'm not a Marvel fan. I don't really care about comics in general, and I'm not super into the whole superhero genre even. So for me, all of those components add nothing. Am I excited to see Squirrel Girl in the game? No. Am I excited for Jeff? No. Am I excited for Magneto? No, not really. Some of them I think look cool design-wise, or are funny, or interesting, or have neat kits in the game even. But as characters in and of themselves, it does nothing for me. And unlike Overwatch, which is its own original world of characters who only exist in the context of the game itself and the media that has spawned off from that, there's almost a barrier in play for me to feel like I can really grow to like any of the characters in Marvel Rivals because there's so much pre-existing context for that character's existence that I'm simply not privy to. And no, I don't want to go out of my way to read a bunch of comics from the past 50 years in order to understand all the important backstory of Punisher or Black Widow or any random character from the roster. If the characters are fun to play, then maybe I'll be interested enough to go back and look at that old original material. Overwatch was in the exact same boat for me back in 2016. I went into the game only really liking Reinhardt and Bastion because I thought they looked cool in the images and promotional material I'd seen beforehand, but as soon as I started playing Overwatch, I fell so much in love with the gameplay itself that I grew to love the characters who were a part of it, and am now a big fan of basically all the characters to some extent or another. But in the case of Marvel Rivals, it's been close to a month. I have over a dozen hours in the game, and barring maybe Penny and Mantis, I can't honestly say I have any interest in any of these characters whatsoever. The gameplay has not made me fall in love with the game, and the game has not made me fall in love with the characters. If I already loved these characters, I'm sure it'd be gangbusters, and I would be so excited to see all my favorite characters and heroes playable in the game. But in my case, I cannot lean on the characters to find enjoyment or investment in Marvel Rivals, which means the only thing that could potentially make me interested in the game is the gameplay itself, which, as I mentioned before, just doesn't hit as hard as Overwatch or even Fortnite. Perhaps as time goes on, some of these things will improve and I'll grow to find more enjoyment in Marvel Rivals, but at the moment, the only reason I'm really playing this game at all is because it's new, it's fresh, it's something a little different, and it's just interesting to have a nice little change of pace. But even despite that, I've played way more Overwatch and Fortnite in that exact same time period, because these are games that just are more fun to play. Which is why Marvel Rivals has failed to convert me from an Overwatch player to a Rivals player, and at this point, I don't expect it ever will. At the end of the day, that's fine. I'm content with just playing Overwatch and Fortnite. I understand why people hate Overwatch and Blizzard specifically so much. I mean, believe me, I've been covering this game for years at this point. I'm more familiar with the crimes of Blizzard and their failure to deliver on promises than most people. But at the end of the day, if Overwatch is just a more fun game for me to play than Rivals is, I'm gonna play Overwatch. And as I already covered in a previous video of mine, I'm glad Marvel Rivals exists because competition is always good in the gaming space. When games like Overwatch and Rivals have to compete against each other, the players are always the ones who win. So I'm glad Marvel Rivals is here, and I'm glad people love it, because that means Overwatch is going to have to up its own game in order to retain much of its player base, which is only a good thing for me. And so on that note, thank you all for watching this long, rambly video giving my take on Marvel Rivals. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Are you an Overwatch player who's perhaps jumped ship to Rivals? If so, what about Rivals has sold you over the Overwatch experience? Or maybe you're like me, maybe you tried Rivals, found it wasn't for you, and have your own reasons why you're sticking with Overwatch. Either way, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, be sure to subscribe, hit up that bell icon, follow me on X, and join my Discord server to hang out and never miss any of my future Overwatch 2 news streams and other content. And special thanks to my YouTube channel members who help make these videos possible. If you'd like to join them to earn some cool rewards, then just hit that join button down below. Otherwise, this is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.